Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 4, The Lost City of Ithos. Chapters 1 through 5, Boundary Zone, Lothal, An Entire City of Godrix, Grovebringer, and The Needle of Leagues. In these chapters, our friends are going on an adventure and once again wind up in the wrong place at the wrong time and are under attack. And honestly, at this point, it just feels like they should stay home. Just stay home from now on. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is up here in the chat, accompanying me and helping me remember names that I forget and whatnot. So, yeah, this section, beginning this book, I just want to mention, and this is something that was sort of unavoidable due to the way that it was booked. Dan has been pre-booking entire books all in one shot. Which is the easiest way to make sure that you're going to be able to get something covered in like a reasonable time. But this book, it took a little bit longer between the book 3 commission and this book's commission. And I had been booked up in a certain portion of my calendar already. So this has resulted in there being a 4-week gap in the middle of this book. And I'm sorry about that, but there was just no, the way that things had already been filled up and the timing of the episodes that had already been booked is such that I can't move them to other dates without messing things up because they're wannabe episodes, which means I have a co-host who is joining me for those. The person who commissioned it comes on camera. And so they planned on the days that will work for them and booked those dates specifically because that's what their schedule needs. So I can't move things around. And there's a bunch of them right in the same section because of some events that are going to be happening in One Piece. So I am going to be having 2 episodes of coverage for this. Oh, Dan says having the tab muted prevents hearing you. I'm sorry, Dan. I mean, you may have missed what I said. There's going to be 2 episodes of coverage, and then there's going to be 4 weeks before the 3rd episode of coverage because of the way the scheduling had worked out. And I looked at it and tried to figure out if there was a way to move things around, but there just isn't. It's just... that was what happened when the booking was made. So I don't think that we have that issue with any of the other ones coming up, but I know that it's not ideal to have that big a gap. But I think, you know, this is the 4th. So there are times where if I take a long break from something, coming back can be hard. I'll have forgotten character names and whatever, but we're in the 4th book at this point. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I know the world. I know the characters. I've got the story pretty much in mind. So I think we should be fine. But I just want to warn people who are listening along. If you don't see any episodes dropping for a time and you're like, what the hell? I'll be back, but it'll just be a minute. So 4th book, we are starting things off with a bang, as usual. Hugh is very distant in this section. He is struggling a lot with his breakup with Ava. And everybody keeps using the word sulking to describe him. And I've got to admit, I took a bit of issue with this. It's more than one person that uses the word sulking. And I have always, and this may simply be my interpretation. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and look up like the official definition. But for me, when I have heard the word sulk, there has always been an implication that somebody is overreacting or being sullen in a way that's like a bit childish, and the thing that they're upset about is sort of trivial, and that isn't the word that I would use when somebody is experiencing their first breakup. Okay, so it's saying the actual official dictionary definition: be silent, morose, and bad-tempered out of annoyance or disappointment. A period of gloomy and bad-tempered silence stemming from annoyance and resentment. So my interpretation of it being a sort of childish thing that's done out of, like I said, over something that's kind of trivial, I'm applying a definition to it that is not actually official. It's just sort of the way that I interact with that word. However, I would argue Hugh is grieving. And I don't know, I'm surprised that nobody else uses that word. Like, the end of a relationship, even as an adult who is experienced with dating and knows that sometimes things end, it's still difficult. You know, it's still a tricky thing to cope with. And there's always a sense of like hope and excitement that you maybe have met somebody who will really work out. This is Hugh's very, very first relationship. And I honestly feel like people are being a little bit too dismissive of it. You know, I didn't really care for Ava that much, and his relationship with her, while I was glad that he had the opportunity to have a girlfriend and I was like pleased on his behalf, I can't say that as a reader I was like all that invested. However, you know, as somebody who is very sensitive, like Hugh is just a really emotional person, and he didn't choose this. This was not like a mutual thing, you know. She dumped him, and it was an unexpected thing, clearly. And I just feel like I wished everybody were a little bit like taking it a little bit more seriously on his behalf, instead of behaving as if he's drawing it out like in a way that feels almost purposeful. And, you know, not to say, there are some people who will do that, where you're just like, all right, look, I feel like you're just enjoying being miserable now. I don't get that with Hugh, though, at all. So anyway, I just wanted to mention this at the outset, because I was really surprised at how often the word sulk is used. And it's simply not a word. Like, if they had been together a much shorter time, if things had been a little bit less intense between them, because like they were together pretty much every second that they could be, you get the impression that he may have lost his virginity to her. Like, it's sort of the subtext of the scene when they leave the dance. I just feel like this is a pretty big deal for him, and I don't blame him for having a difficult time. A lot of what's going on in this first chapter is him having no ability to focus on what's being talked about around him, so that later on, when they actually get to the city, there's a bunch of stuff that he has to ask about because he didn't absorb it at all the first time, or even sometimes like the multiple times that it was talked about with him or in front of him. So let's see. Oh, Dan says in the chat, I really don't want to book Tongue Eater until we get the book 7 release date, so it can be back to back to back. Maybe we will get a release date in that gap. Oh man. So is that supposed to be the final book? I know we've talked about this, Dan, forgive me. I just like keep forgetting. It's hard for me to hold all of the different series in my head. Oh, okay. Dan says, yeah, book 7 is the final book. Right. Okay. So yeah, Kandaran is like trying to get his attention and is not successful. She gets him to like focus for a second, and then he just drifts off again and manages to completely tune her out. And Kandaran is talking about the buffer zone between Skyhold's territory and Lothal's. Try to behave yourself in Lothal. Relations with Ampiok have been strained enough in recent years, and I really don't have time to deal with a diplomatic incident if you irritate him. I have more than enough work repairing the damage Bakori did to Skyhold. And then mention the increase from Lothal's cults at the moment. It's best to stay out of the maneuvering of cults whenever possible, which I think is just solid advice in life. And then Kandaran excuses them all, but speaks to Hugh. You miss the Radhand girl. Her name is Ava, Hugh said, a little heat creeping into his voice. Believe it or not, Hugh, I'm not mad at you for sulking, nor even for not paying attention. Irritated, yes, but not angry. I've been dealing with adolescent humans for centuries. This is an utterly normal part of your lives. I even factor it into my education plans for students. The only unpredictable part is the precise timing, and it's hardly that unpredictable. Hugh, if anything, felt even more irritated at that. Which, look, nobody wants to be told that their own very acute feeling heartbreak, that is the first time they have ever personally gone through this, is just one in a long line of nearly identical heartbreaks that you have seen over the course of your life. There's just, again, a feeling in this of it being like dismissed, you know? And I do not believe at all that is what Kandaran intends. It's just a fact. Like, we don't like it when our personal experiences are minimized. It doesn't matter what age you are. It happens a lot more to younger people because older people really have been through a lot and understandably are like, this is so not a big deal in the grand scheme. But they don't have a grand scheme yet. They have the tiny little bit of their life they've gotten to live so far, and this is a major milestone for them in it. So, again, I just really wish that people who are older could take a moment and step out of their own perspective and remember what it was like to be a teen going through heartbreak, because that shit is consuming, utterly consuming. And I remember it acutely, and it was just a drag. So, she holds something out, and it's a very small index node, and he's like, what is this? And she says, all right, since you're pacted, and you always, like, get in trouble and stuff anyway, I think that we need a way to stay in touch. So you can't search the index from this node. It's only got like communication in it, and it takes a lot of mana. So don't use it in situations where you're going to need mana to power spells to defend yourself. However, she says, it will, circumstances allowing, enable me to advise you or even come to your rescue in an emergency. I am merely protecting my investment with you, and we will be conducting lessons through the book as well, so don't expect this expedition to be a vacation. And yeah, I'm excited about this. Anything that like allows people to communicate more easily in stories is a big plus for me. Like, it's a really delicate balancing act, right? Because like today we're used to everybody having access to cell phones and being able to text or message or comment at the moment that you think of something and get an almost immediate response depending on who you're talking to and their availability. And so when you're in a story and somebody just needs to ask a simple question, but a whole bunch of stuff needs to be set up for them to actually find the person in order to ask this one question. Sometimes it can be like, this is good that there is an obstacle to speaking easily to this person for plot reasons, for world building reasons, whatever. But there can be times where all you can think is like, God, I wish you had a cell phone. You know what I mean? And it's just sort of, all of this would be a lot easier if you just had a way to talk to them. And so in this situation, this particular scenario, I'm going to root for this and say I like this development. So they go down to their sand ship, and this one is called the Ox of Indris. And their first mate is arguing with Alustin. That damn book has been fighting with the ship's cat again. Strapping a pair of knitted cat ears to a 2-foot-long spider really doesn't make it a cat, Alustin said. Precious likes her ears, the woman retorted. And it's traditional to always call the ship's rat catcher a cat, whatever it actually is. That's absurd, Alustin said. Look, I think I've made myself clear in other stuff. Me and spiders are pals. I don't like most bugs. Insects, moths, fucking ew. Me and spiders, though, we're on the same side. Spiders would also like those flies to be dead. For different reasons. Doesn't matter, though. Our objective is the same if our motivations are different. So I have no problem. But the idea of a 2-foot-long one that is out here catching rats to eat, I feel like I maybe have to draw the line here. I don't know. That feels like a lot. And it's got little cat ears on it. I was like, when Alustin says that's absurd, I was like, sir, it's a tradition. And I'm sorry, Alustin, but the shit that I have seen you put up with just because this is how it's done, you don't get to call anything absurd ever. That's just fucking off the table for you. That's all I'm saying. So Hugh has to call back his book. The spellbook settled contentedly in Hugh's arms atop the index node. He sighed, plucked the knitted cat ears off the spellbook, and tossed them back to the first mate. The idea that this book is running around with these little cat ears. My personal, headcanon for this. The book just wants its own pair of cat ears. It likes them. And it just wants them. So it's fighting the spider for them. And doesn't actually care about the spider. It's just like this accessory is desirable for me. So here's hoping that Hugh picks up the hint he's dropping. It's dropping. And fashions the book a pair of cat ears of similar or lesser style. Or similar or greater style. He goes right down to his cabin and basically curls up and is keeping to himself. And Talia and Godric watch him and are feeling a little bit like, what do we need to do to snap him out of this? And Talia is startled by the two of them coming up. And when she asks Talia, Sabé asks, how long do you think it will be until Hugh is doing better? And Talia is like, how the hell should I know? Sabé says, you're the expert on Hugh's moods. And later on, there's a moment where Hugh says something about how a morning star isn't a hammer when Godric is looking through some weapons to choose something for himself. And Talia immediately replies, yeah, but it would, the morning star would probably still work for his combat style. And then she looks like she feels guilty at the fact that she didn't agree with him right away. And is saying, but yeah, the hammer though is very iconic. and sort of tries to change her stance. Like, her immediate response was what she really thinks. And then she amended it because she is trying to keep Hugh in a good mood. And it was just, I think it's Godric speaks to her about this later and is like, you're acting fucking crazy. Like, it's fine to want to care about your friend and be conscious of their feelings, but you're really taking this to an extreme that is starting to be like foolish at this point. And Talia is still telling herself that she is only wanting Hugh to be over Ava because she wants Hugh to be happy again, and because she just like cares about his well-being and happiness. So she is still not really admitting to herself how she feels about him, or hasn't figured out. Admitting implies she is certain that she cares about him, but she won't face it. I think she still hasn't like sorted out exactly how she feels. But yeah, so she winds up going below decks for a moment and is planning, like, it's clear she hadn't intended to, but she's in front of Hugh's door and is like going to knock and standing there sort of deciding what to do. And then all of a sudden the ship lurches and she feels this nausea coming on and she has to run off. And then we have the combo between Alustin and Arthur, where Alustin is accusing them all of being more dramatic and ridiculous than usual. And Arthur says it's the stress. And Alustin's like, what stress? Nothing's happening. And Arthur's like, dude, what is wrong with you? Have you seen everything that has happened to them over like the past year? There are a lot of like full grown mages that have not gone through the shit they have experienced recently. They are stressed. They're coping. And I was like, thank you, sir. Like, they should all have PTSD. Really. That's where we're at this point. They have been tricked and betrayed and left to fend for themselves. So they thought, like, we know that wasn't actually what was happening, but they felt utterly abandoned. And there are, like, later on, Talia is kind of trying to think over exactly how she feels. I think it's Talia, about the fact that they like put some protections in place for them, but they clearly weren't even remotely close to enough. And the fact that they got used as bait the way that they did is just really shitty. And yeah, it's like completely valid. Alustin says something about how he was never that bad when he was their age. And Arthur is like, oh, okay, I think you're forgetting I was your teacher. And yeah, you were. You absolutely were. And he says, not only that, you're a grown-ass man now. And you are one of the biggest fucking drama queens I've ever met in my life. So you may want to not be throwing stones right now. And I really appreciated that. But personally, yeah, this is again a thing, like so many people are like, I was so much better behaved when I was a kid. No, you weren't. Like, there are certain things that I know I didn't act up in this and that way. There are certain things that I simply would be punished for in a way that I was just like, I'm never going to risk it. But I acted up in my own very special and distinct ways. And we all have our things. And just stop it. Just stop trying to like, just remember like this golden version of yourself. You were a child who cried and got petulant and threw fits over things and got, very emotional about stuff that your parents didn't understand either. It's fine. So Sabe busts into Hugh's bunk finally and is like, we're coming into the boundary zone. You should get up and see the city as it's coming toward us because it is a really cool view. And she finally winds up having to like pull him out of bed, and he fights her with a cantrip and they wind up like on the ceiling. And Talia she also tries to get Talia up to see it. And I did think this was pretty funny. "This had better be worth it," Talia said, then stopped as she looked straight into Sabé's upside-down face. "What are you doing on the... Hugh?" Hugh here was refusing to come out of his room and decided to be difficult when I tried to drag him out. "Huh," Talia said. Yeah, this is pretty funny. I enjoy that Hugh is like, "I'm going to sit here and not participate and mind my business. But when you try and make that difficult for me, I'm not even going to do something to like stop you. I'm just going to make it fucking annoying for you." So they come up to the city and it's a really weird, the description of it is wild. A single curious stone column jutted from the ground to the side of the canal. It was pentagonal in shape and around the height of a grown man, fashioned of some dark stone. Not a minute later, another pair of columns came into view along the side of the canal. Are they guideposts? Soon the columns began jutting from the sand with such frequency they resembled a stubby forest. A large number had fallen and were lying in the sand. And eventually, Arthur explains that this is columnar basalt. It's what happens when liquid flowing magma is allowed to cool slowly. As the cooling magma solidifies into lava, it contracts into these columns. It's the same formation process as any other crystal, just on a larger scale than most. And as for these particular columns, they were moved here to act as a training ground for Lethal's stone mages. And they see it coming out, and it's like not as big as Skyhold, but it is it's like completely comprised of all of these pillars that are all these different sizes and like interlocked together and spread in all these different directions. And the sand canal goes through, but they can smell the sea. Like it's not that far away. And let's see. "How's the ship still sailing through the tunnel?" Sabé said. Alustin pointed to spell forms near the base of the walls. "The tunnel's enchanted to keep a constant wind flowing through it. If you look at the sand on either side of the tunnel, you can see it blowing back outward. The wind blows the other direction on that side of the tunnel." And when they get to the end of the tunnel, Hugh cast a cantrip Candaron had taught him, one intended to shield his eyes from the light of stellar affinity spells. It should work fine to keep the sun from blinding him. When they exited, everyone else winced and covered their eyes, but Hugh gasped, and that spell winds up becoming kind of important later. Lethal was a gargantuan cooled lava flow, entirely composed of basalt columns. Lethal's wall wasn't a wall at all. The whole city was built out of the columnar basalt. All of the streets, all of the buildings, everything was built with the pentagonal columns. And that is wild. Like, I was trying to picture this, and I have to admit, I was having a pretty difficult time. I don't know if the fandom for these books has grown big enough that there are people doing artwork, but, you know, there's the cover of the book, but it's very much the outer edges. You don't really see the city the same way. And I'm just really curious about like the interpretation people have of what this place looks like. And Alustin makes this fucking joke, the worst city in the world to drop a coin. And nobody laughs. I thought it was funny. Because the coin will roll into one of the cracks between the columns and get lost. It was funnier in my head. You probably should have waited till we actually set foot on the columns. Would have worked better then. Alustin just sighed. I don't know. I thought it was funny. This, you know, I don't know, it was a lot funny. So, then we go into Talia's POV, and it turns out the people here are humongous. Like, Talia doesn't see a single adult that is less than like 6 feet tall. And because she is so short, it starts to get kind of like almost claustrophobic is the word I think is used. And she's like, man, am I going to get fucking lost in the mix here and just trampled or what? And the idea of everybody being this height is really interesting. Like, I feel like if Owen and I were here together, Owen is I won't say like Owen is into tall women. It's not exactly true because Owen just likes women. He's kind of an equal opportunity, you know, fat, skinny, tall, short, dark haired, light haired, bald headed. Doesn't really matter. If she's hot, she's hot. And I can respect that. I personally am into tall men though. And Owen at times can be into tall women as well. So I feel like if we were in a place where everybody was taller than us, it would probably be just the both of us just being like, oh my God. Oh God. Oh, wow. Wow. Over and over again. So let's see. This rock's almost black. Shouldn't it be hot from the sunlight? Lethal's primary enchantments drain the heat from the stone and store it deep underground. There's a massive cavern there where they use that heat to boil seawater and separate out the salt. They pump the water up into the city using that same heat, then use the salt as one of the city's main exports and sources of government revenue. And I think that's a really cool idea. That is just a neat little detail that is like, you know, I don't know if that's inspired by anything, but I thought that that was a cool concept. Sounded like doable. You know, there are certain things that people talk about in both in magic and when people are describing like science fiction, and things that sound like they work and things that sound like, look, that sounds like bullshit, but I'll let it go. For me, that's a big problem with Doctor Who, is there's a lot of stuff that you just are like, yeah, that doesn't sound like it would work. But this is something that I immediately am like, no, I believe you. That sounds correct to me. So let's see. Yeah, so here comes Talia and she's like looking around, and then finally this little paper crane is in front of her and it like slowly guides her back towards the rest of them. And she's like so relieved, but she doesn't notice a crack in the street and then just trips. Before she hit the ground, she felt her fall slow, then reverse, and she came back up onto her feet again. Thanks, Hugh, she said, blushing a little. That's what I'm here for, Hugh said absently, turning away. We really do fall down a lot, don't we? Sebe said. I think that's kind of our specialty, but you get used to watching your steps here before long. In some of the neighborhoods towards the edge of the city, there's no cracks between the columns, which helps. Construction of the city over the years loosened a lot of them. Talia ignored their conversation and fumed to herself. She hated this city already. So I'm going to say Talia has just like kind of come over fully to having a crush on Hugh. I'm just going to say, like, that's it for me. She is kind of into him. And that moment was genuinely embarrassing for her. And she doesn't really get embarrassed often, you know, so I'm just calling that. Let's see. People are in the chat. Sorry, guys, I missed this. Women are gorgeous, so that's understandable. The heat enchantments are so cool. This is what I want to see from a fantasy world. Yeah. Dan says it's kind of what we can do to mass desalinate water with thorium nuclear reactors. Dan? I believe you. I don't know what the hell that means, but sure. MX Shard says it's not, quote, reversing the polarity as a buzzword. Exactly. So let's see. He is being sulking. Nothing wrong with that. He just had his first breakup. It's normal, but it's still a little exhausting. Maybe not sulky so much as dramatic and angry. Anyway, Hugh's being dramatic, yes, not ridiculous. Which is like, again, okay. Fair. She frowned at Alustin, but quickly wiped it off her face. Things had been strained between the two of them since their confrontation in his office. Sabe still hadn't decided whether to tell the others the events of the last year, including Bakuri's breakout and the awakening of Jaskalkus. Jaskalkus had been engineered as a coup. Sabe had long accustomed herself to the idea that she and her friends would be pawns, or at least she thought she had, but something had rubbed her entirely the wrong way about the callous manner in which she and her friends had been used as bait. I think I attributed this to Talia earlier in the episode, but yeah, it's Sabe. And Alustin says, all right, we've got a lost city to talk about. And when Sabe expresses some concern about him talking openly about that, he asks somebody on the street, do you know where the lost city of Imperial Ithos is located? The man just stared at him, confused. Then his face went blank, and he looked away. And he's like, yeah, see, that enchantment is still there. Which is a really wild concept that you could speak directly to somebody. It's like in Westworld when you try and show them a photo of the outside world and they just say that doesn't look like anything to me. So we have 5 major potential sites for Ithos we'll be investigating. They're all along the southern coast of Ithos, so we'll be sailing east to check all of them out. There are some other minor sites we'll be likely inspecting if we have time. It's going to be big enough for a large city to fit. It will be an ether desert that is starting to have rapid and unpredictable increases in ether density. And there should be signs of a lateral mana well. Unlike many other cities throughout history, Imperial Ithos was built on a lateral mana well with a rather stunted labyrinth, not a junction well with a full labyrinth. There shouldn't be a labyrinth there when we find it. The entrance to Ithos' labyrinth was dragged out of our world along with the city itself. There are a few other clues as well, largely based on the distance to historical population centers and the like. Imperial Ithos was somewhat remote and inaccessible for a capital as far as we can tell. It was only built a couple centuries before the fall of the Empire, and it was built that way deliberately so as to be more defensible. And Talia suggests that it's in Emblem. And Sabe is like, did you read some stupid book that gave you this idea? And Alustin's finally like, look, it's not an Emblem. That place has been a mana desert way before the Ithonian thing happened. You mentioned Imperial Havath was looking as well. Alustin nodded, and at least a half dozen other great powers we know of. There's a good chance we're going to be attacked on this trip. How good of a chance? Talia asked. Alustin and Arthur glanced at one another meaningfully. I'd be shocked if we don't get attacked, honestly, Alustin finally said. So then we go to the looking for weapons. This is so good, you guys. There was a part earlier where Talia accuses Sabe and Godric of ogling one of the ogling. I think it's ogling one of the sailors, deckhands, whatever you want to call them. He glanced over at Sabe, who was flirting with the shop clerk, badly flirting. Now that she'd finally convinced herself it was fine to date, she'd been diving in headfirst at every opportunity. It hadn't gone beyond awkward flirting just yet, but it was just a matter of time before someone was crying on Godric's shoulder over all this. I am really curious what Sabe's flirting looks like. I want to be part of it. I just hope that we get to see this up close and personal. So Godric is he's looking around at things. There's a part at which he's thinking about the iconic hammer and wondering if he wants something that isn't similar to his father's, because he just gets recognized as Arthur's son so often and kind of wants to be his own person. But he finally does get this huge hammer that it's a sledgehammer that I think Talia finds. And it's a cool thing. It's got a metal rod in the center, but he says that like a tree mage grew the handle up around the tang of the hammerhead, which means that shit is going to be strong as hell because the metal is like attached to the tang. The head is attached to the tang, so it's like all one piece. So yeah, that's kind of dope. It's like it doesn't have any magical powers. It doesn't have that cool like silence spell or anything, but it can really do some damage and take some damage. He'd prefer something enchanted, but there's no way he could afford an enchanted weapon right now. So they bargain for it and he takes it. There's a part at which Sabe says, "Why are Lethalan coins blank on one side?" Godric says, "I heard it's because Lethal used to trade rulers so often that the city mint got sick of cutting new molds. I'm not sure that's true, though." And I have to be honest, I sort of started to wonder about, like, the lost city of Ithos here. And I'm like, is it possible that those coins aren't blank, but that because part of an enchantment is still in place, you just can't read or see what's on the back of them? Like, not to say that I think Lothal is Ithos, but what if it were? I'm just asking questions here. Like, what if it's right under Lothal? What if? I'm just saying. They are talking about what bakery they want to go to. Hugh says for the very first time, literally ever, that he's not sure he wants to go to one. And they stop dead in shock. And then it says that pause saved Godric's life. He heard a loud clack. Then the world went white. And I really enjoy this. Hugh still has that cantrip up, that one to protect against the glare. It said a lot about how his mana reservoirs had grown that he hadn't even noticed the drain. So when the dagger-thin lightning bolt impacted the wall just past Godric, he wasn't blinded by the glare like the others. So yeah, this is our attack, and we have... I'm looking at the clock here. I've only got 15 minutes left to talk about everything that happens with all of this fighting. But suffice to say, we find out that somebody thought Godric was his dad. So it's really kind of amusing to me that earlier he was like, I wonder if I should get a weapon that makes me stand out as a separate person from my dad. And maybe if he had... they wouldn't have mistaken him for his dad. Like if he wasn't carrying a hammer, I don't know what kind of difference that would have made. But I just feels like, I don't know, maybe that is something that might be helpful in the future. So yeah, he is using all of his mana. He's making all of these different wards and stuff. And then another flash of lightning. Around them, people screamed and shouted, dodging for shelter inside the shops. And Sabe is like, what the fuck? And Hugh has to explain, yeah, there's a lightning mage here. And I just felt so bad because there are so many innocent bystanders in the mix here. You know, like there's just a lot of people that are out for a day to shop and that's all. And they just happen to be fucking around. Later on, there's a thing with Alustin and he's getting like, they're chucking basically what amounts to like acid, but I think it's like molten, magma or something. And the droplets, like he disperses them, but they fall onto people below him and he can smell burning flesh and somebody falls and doesn't get up again. Literally just such collateral damage. And I, for one, am over it. Like, can we not, please? These people, take the fight somewhere, go somewhere else, honestly. So let's see, what's that noise before each strike? And Sabe says galvanic beacon acts as a target for lightning spells. So we wait for the next clack, and then Hugh and I jump out from behind the wall and attack. Me? Are you forgetting about your starbolts? Yeah, actually. And I love this. Later on, again, she's like, all right, Hugh, are you ready? And he's like, for what? And she's like, the fucking starbolts. Hello, will you get with the program? He is just not in it, you guys. His brain is all over the fucking place. The lightning's coming from halfway across the city. They've positioned themselves up on top of the edge of the trough near the upper harbor. Arthur was watching the ships in the harbor when the attacking began. Well, more glaring at them from where he was sitting in the on the roof of the inn. Let's see. I don't know why you thought ice would be a decent choice to use against me. Around him, stone began to crack and crumble, flowing upwards in streams toward him. Consider it a gamble, a voice from behind him said. People have tried lightning, poison gas, and every other method they could think of to take you down, and it all fails. In fairness, that was while I was already armored. I'm as vulnerable as anyone else when caught unarmored and unaware. I didn't take you unaware, though, did I? And there is this very slender young man who has a blade made of ice. And Arthur's like, well, you could have, but you didn't want to because you felt like you were going to ambush me. You felt you wanted to prove yourself and ignored probably the orders you were given to ambush me. He says, probably even misled the others in your hand to get a chance at me alone. You guessed right, the man said, then launched a spray of razor-sharp ice crystals at Arthur, whose armor was still incomplete. And they just fall. And this guy steps back and is like, wait, what? And Arthur says, ice is just another type of stone, son. And he's like, it's frozen water. That's not true. What are you talking about? Which was almost my exact reaction. And it was my reaction. And then I sort of stopped myself and went, wait, hold on. And then Arthur says, and rock is just frozen magma. But I don't really think it's the time to be concerning yourself with academic debates. You have better things to worry about. And yeah, that I was like, oh, I see what you mean. Like, sure, at a low enough temperature, ice begins to turn to water, but at or high enough temperature, my bad. At a high enough temperature, ice begins to turn to water because it melts. But at a high enough temperature, rock begins to turn into magma because it melts. And that doesn't make it any less stone. You know? So, okay, I guess. It just, okay. So we go back to our friends and they're talking about like this person and being so far away and trying to figure out how the hell they can defend themselves, how the hell they can find this person and track them down. And let's see, another click, another lightning bolt. It'll take longer because of the gaps between the columns. I'll need to grow them together along the path of the ward No. They've got a spotter, Talia said. What? Galvanic beacons are single-use enchantments, so the click each time is a galvanic beacon hitting the wall. It's extraordinarily unlikely that our lightning mage has the ability to fire a galvanic beacon from this distance. It's almost certainly copper or silver, and there's no way anyone short of archmage level could be controlling or firing metal at this distance, and a copper or silver archmage would have annihilated us by now. So there's got to be a second mage launching and activating the galvanic beacons, and they've got to be much closer. If we can find them and take them down, the lightning mage is useless. So Talia is like, well, you guys have metal and crystal affinities, so maybe you can track him? I'll do it. I'll act as bait. This is Sabe. My lightning affinity is not useful for much, but I can still block lightning if I need to. So she says, we don't have a lot of options. You and Talia need to be ready to hit the spotter hard when he fires the beacon at me. So she goes up into the air, and then we go to Alestin. And he is at this tea shop reading a book, and he goes to tuck the book into his storage tattoo. Then he leapt onto the iron mesh tea shop table as an arrow hammered into the chair he'd been sitting in, his arms still in the satchel. His teacup skittered off the edge of the table, shattering on the basalt floor, but the teapot managed to stay on the table. Can you imagine taking that shot at him and him managing to just literally jump onto the table out of the way? I would be so outraged that he managed to dodge that. That would be infuriating. He leapt erratically from table to table as the archer bombarded the balcony. I swear these poor people, again, the person who owns this tea shop is just trying to make a fucking living, and everybody gets up and bails screaming because there's this hail of arrows falling. I bet nobody prepaid their tab. I'm sure those people are dining and dashing, and I don't blame them. But honestly, the poor people who wind up in the paths of our crew, it just feels like very bad luck for them every time. So this is when he makes the wings out of paper, and then let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Oh, right. This is something that's interesting. Alestin considered heading for the source of the bolts. He'd wager all the gold in his tattoo that either Artur or the apprentices were being targeted, but he needed to shake off the wielder of Grovebringer first. He'd never encountered Grovebringer on this side of the Skyreach range before, but then he'd seldom faced Havathi agents west of the mountains, let alone sacred swordsmen. It's just kind of reminding me of the sword sage in Cradle. Very similar sort of energy here, especially Archmage, and we have Archlords and whatnot. A lot of language that's overlapping here. Let's see. Grovebringer's warlock wielder had also pacted with some sort of item that granted them invisibility. They'd proven to be one of the longest-lived sacred swordsmen the librarians Errant had faced over the years. Both organizations had high fatality rates, in no small part thanks to one another. Given enough preparation time, most librarians Errant were more than a match for the swordsmen one-on-one, but the swordsmen liked throwing ambushes, and almost always outnumbered librarians in the field. So, yeah, this, Grovebringer is just such a dope name, too. That is, it. You wouldn't think that the word grove would be able to elicit much in the way of feeling solemn, but there is something about it. It's heavy, it just feels implacable. I like it. So here it is. A rain of brilliantly glowing droplets tore through his wings, and this is when they rained down on people. Molten lead. That's right. Countless of other droplets of lead replicated its motion as the swordsmen responsible called the lead back to themselves. And he's looking around deciding what to do. Within heartbeats, he was sprinting at top speed towards the swordsman, pulling on the molten lead. So then we go back to Sabe and Hugh, and he gives her this chunk of quartz, and he says, launch that at whoever's firing the beacons at us. I can track it with my affinity senses. Then Talia can use my starbolt to aim. Both of you use the anti-glare cantrip I showed you. So I love that there's a... Wait, are you jumping at 3 or on go? I hope that this remains a thing. I know it's kind of a tired joke, but I don't care. I think it's funny. So she jumps up. From the corner of her eye, she saw a glint from a window, and she turned her head to see a crossbow bolt flying straight at her. She pitched her arm forward in a perfect throw, detonating the wind armor around the arm just as the lump of quartz was leaving her hand. It shot forward like an arrow just as the crossbow bolt struck her wind armor dead center over her chest and was thrown to the side. She pushed outward with her lightning affinity as the lightning struck the crossbow bolt just inches away from her, and she found herself blasting toward the ground away from the lightning. As she fell, Hugh's starbolt lanced toward the window almost bright enough to blind her, even with the cantrip protecting her eyes. Just before she fell behind the wall, a ball of purple-green dreamfire followed it. Interestingly, with the anti-glare cantrip protecting her eyes, she could see spots of yellow in it that must be drowned out normally. So, yeah, they managed to get the spotter. And Hugh struggles quite a bit with the fact that he has just killed a person and is genuinely shaken up about it. And that doesn't surprise me. Once again, Hugh is very sensitive, and this is not to say, like, there can be sometimes an implication in things that I read or watch that if you're able to kill somebody and kind of walk away and not let it bother you, depending on the circumstances of it, that this means that you're not a good person or that there's something wrong with you. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Having not killed anybody myself, I can't speak to exactly what that experience is like, but I do feel like it's going to affect everybody very differently, So the fact that he takes this so hard just seems very in character for me. Excuse me. And he wonders at one point, how Talia can be kind of casual about it. But just the way that she was raised and how normalized and necessary it was made to be, it just, it's going to be a completely different situation. So I just felt bad for him. He stops and thinks about it and has to throw up, So then they start running, they spot a Lustin, and they can see Arthur. And there's this whole thing. This is really wild. Hugh could feel the rumbling of Arthur's fight against their attackers. The bursts of ice either shattered harmlessly off his armor or were deflected in midair, presumably by Arthur's own magic. The green-yellow mist boiled uselessly around Arthur. The stone mage had apparently come up with his own solution for poison gas years ago. He'd also come up with some solution for seeing outside of his armor without any sort of faceplate or hole, but he'd never told the apprentices what it was, and if Godric knew, he wasn't telling. "That's what I'm supposed to live up to," Godric muttered. "That'll happen." And there is something very wholesome to me about how impressed Godric is with his father, and knowing that his father is a good man who cares about his son and does his best to support him and is very reasonable in his expectations and the way he sees his kids. I feel like the fact that Godric is feeling a pressure to live up to him, it's honestly kind of a wholesome pressure in some ways. It's not entirely of course, there are times where trying to live up to somebody else who's outstanding is maybe going to be a losing battle or something that kind of causes you to not focus on what you want as much as what you think you need to do to prove that you're as good as somebody else. So that can go wrong, certainly. But there was just something to me that was kind of sweet about the fact that this is, we know, a genuinely good man who is also a fucking badass. And the fact that his son, who is quite capable already, to be honest, is feeling yeah, I am absolutely never going to be able to reach this level. I was I don't know, there's something sweet about that. So let's see. Yeah, here it is. How was Talia so relaxed about killing people? She'd killed more than a few in the time he'd known her, and apparently killed a raider from a different mountain clan when she was just a girl. But Hugh could never imagine himself being as calm about it as she seemed. And for that matter, Godric had helped Talia drop several tons of rock on the valve room, killing multiple cultists. He didn't seem that much more shaken up about it than Talia did. Hugh didn't think Sabé had ever killed anyone, but he wasn't sure. People have different, mindsets about things like this. So we're heading up to Ampioc's palace to find him. Why would we go to the palace to find him? Hugh had just opened his mouth to respond when lightning struck the docks. Alestin dodged around the trunk of a brand new cedar tree as it grew out of the street, leaping up over its writhing roots. It was somehow ironic that this forest was only minutes old and it was already having its first forest fire. I feel like offended personally that this really cool city with its really unique structure of these like crystals that make these pillars is getting fucked up by this tree root thing. You know, I don't know. It just feels really rude. It's like dragging your finger through a really nicely decorated cake, like the icing, you know? Just come on. That's not the thing, sir. That's saying it, Chief. So Alestin winds up facing off with this woman who is so certain that she has gotten the best of him. This is a really interesting moment. Alestin almost tripped on another tilted column. Then he stopped and stared down at the exposed crevice. He smiled and began sending sheets of paper down into it. And the woman laughed, finally decided to stand and fight. Not much good it'll do you. There's not a chance you'll be able to get close to me. Who would believe I would be the one to take down the last loyal son of Helicote? Do not know what that means. Valia will be infuriated, but she's had more than her fair share of opportunities to turn you. What? Also, again, may I say? And all Alestin says is, that area looks real comfortable. There must be something you're doing to avoid the heat. And she says it won't do you much good. And he says it already has. And then all of these sheets of paper start rushing up and obscure her from view. There was a brief scream. Then the flying papers turned red. At that, the whirling cloud of molten lead began to slow. As it came to a halt, the lead rained down, completely coating the dead swordsman, her weapon, and the paper in still molten metal. Guys, I've got to be honest, I did not understand what was happening here. So we get a bit of an explanation here about him sending the papers down and it getting tight enough and that he got them into position. But I don't understand what happened beyond that. How I genuinely don't. And I read this section a couple times and I felt like it's not explained. Is it? What? How is the lead, the liquid lead falling? Why are they targeting her? The whirling cloud of molten lead began to slow. As it came to a halt, the lead rained down. Is that she was the one wielding the lead, and because she died, she lost control of it and it coated her? So, Dan says he shredded her. I see. MX Shard says sharpened/reinforced paper. So it was like a cloud, and that's why the papers turned red, because that confused me as well. It's red with blood. I'm thinking the papers, literally the paper, they turned into red papers, that this is indicating the transition into another stage of the spell. I was not getting that was supposed to be they got spattered with blood. I see. Okay, thank you guys, because I really I read that a couple times and I was like, I feel like I'm missing something. I was very much missing something. Okay. And then because I wasn't putting together about the lead being her weapon, when she falls and it coats her, I was like, wait, did he manage to control that also in the midst of this? What's going on? I gotcha. So he basically put her in like a giant, like garbage disposal made out of paper blades. Wow. That's rough. So when he says about how like, you've got some way to keep the space around you cool, he was basically like, so if I tried to attack you with paper, they wouldn't burn up. Right? That's why he was asking that. Because that was also part of my confusion, was like, why is he talking about the temperature? Okay. I'm getting it. Oh my God, I'm so over time. I totally lost track of time. Well, that's pretty much like, we have this, and then we have Sabe, who is, the lightning strikes finally stop, and there's this mage that is basically like, you guys, I'm going to have to kill you all. And it really sucks because you seem like you have a lot of promise. And we just thought that he was his dad. So really no hard feelings, but I am going to have to kidnap you. We're not going to hurt you or anything. Like, that's not the point. But, I can say that you killed one of my people. So I don't know, all things being equal, even if I did want to hurt you, I don't think that'd be totally out of line. And she begins attacking Arthur, who's got his armor that he's using to defend himself. And it's like not having no effect, but she is clearly expecting it to be more effective than it is. He's managing to hold his own. And Hugh uses a starbolt again. And let's see. It never hit. The lightning simply, scattered and burst in midair. Hugh watched the lightning crawl across the edges of his ward, trying to reach them. And she's hitting them and hitting them and hitting them, trying to break through this ward. And she's starting to manage to break through as they're all attacking her. And then another thing with like a crack in the ground near her. There is so much confusion that Sabe uses a wind spell to tuck something in around there, and she doesn't notice it. So, and I'm thinking to myself that it's something like white that was light enough for her to move, and I'm like, that feels like it's probably a bone or something. And it ends with Talia saying, "Have a nice flight," and the pier exploded. And that is the end of chapter 5. So I'm over time. I have got to wrap up, but very exciting beginning. So we'll see where we go. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and helping me out with that last battle with the Leston and what happened. Appreciate you all so much. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. And I will see you on Thursday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.